right. Hey, thanks everybody for coming. My name is Kevin Kramer. If I haven't met you, it's good to see everybody. Why I got scheduled to follow Chris Brown, I'm not sure, but probably lower your expectations. So, anyway, glad you're here. So today, I wanted to talk to you on a topic that called just why do we do the things that we do? And it comes from Paul's verse in Romans 7:19, where Paul says, "And I want to do what's good, but I don't. And I don't want to do wrong, but I do it anyway." I gotta tell you, there's probably a time in my life where that was my life verse. Not something you see on a coffee cup, but it's so true of us, I think. Why do we do what we don't want to do, and why do we not do the things that we know we should do? So I believe that God designed us just with some basic emotions that we need to meet. First, I believe we need to feel accepted. We need to be accepted without judgment. We need to belong to something. And then I think we need to be connected to other people, right? We have this need, this desire to know and be known and love and be loved. And finally, we need our lives to be valued. We want to have purpose in our lives. We want to live for something just bigger than ourselves, it seems. So, we get messages all day long, whether externally from other people or from the world, and then internally, just the thoughts that go on in our heads. And when these emotional needs aren't met, sometimes these messages that we get, they're just going to drive us into unhealthy, dysfunctional, and sometimes even destructive choices. So I believe we act like this a lot of times just subconsciously. We just do it. And at some level, we're trying to get our emotional needs met. We're just walking through life, or maybe just an area of our life. We're bruised, we're hurt, we're wounded, we're discouraged, even hopeless at times. So if I talk more about the accepted part, sociologists will tell us that the most difficult time for adjustment are kids when they're 12 to 13. They're in middle school. They're asking those questions of who am I and why am I here? But it's also the time when social groups start forming, right? And we all want to belong to a group. We all want to feel like we belong. I know when I was growing up, I had four main groups. There were the jocks, the freaks, the nerds, and then the rest of us. I thought the jocks were the coolest. So they were the ones that I perceived the most value with. And I would just try to weasel my way into that group. So I decided I'm not a gifted athlete, but I went out for the tennis team. Only to find out later that most jocks don't consider tennis a sport. Well, but so what I do when I don't feel accepted or I don't feel like I belong somewhere, I put on a mask, right? I pretend. I fake it. I present externally something that's different than who I really am internally, in the hopes that if I do, I'll be liked or I'll be accepted. I have my family mask, right? The one where I tell everybody, and honestly sometimes exaggerate, how good a dad I am or how good a husband I am. I have my business mask, making sure I present myself in alignment with my boss. I have my competency mask, right, where I portray an image where I've got everything together. And of course, I have my church mask, where I pretend that I'm just full of joy and peace and a spirit-filled Christian. Or the worst one, the mask I wear when I look in the mirror. Because I gotta tell you, there are times when I can't stand what I've done or even who I've become at times. But the problem with pretending, the problem with portraying an image of someone who we really aren't, when we do that, we aren't being who God's designed us to be. God designed us to live naked and unashamed, authentic, vulnerable, not to hide behind masks. But when I'm pretending, there's an internal conflict for me that goes on. The message I tell myself is that if those people don't really accept and love me, they love and accept the pretend me. And we all have this need to be accepted, like I said, and we do just some unhealthy things to get that need met. And over time, this is what happened to me. I start to lose who I am. I start to lose my identity. I start to lose who God's designed and created me to be. I spend so much time hiding behind masks. I don't even know sometimes who the person is behind the mask anymore. It seemed the person who God uniquely created at this time in history was no longer there, or at least so far buried down that I probably couldn't even recognize them. My self-worth, my self-image, how I view and value myself, man, that just takes a nosedive. But I guess that makes sense, because if I won't share who the real me is, and I have to display that pretend me, the message that sends to me is that I must be defective. If it wasn't, then I wouldn't have a need to put a mask on and pretend. So what's the solution? For me, it was a few things. Know that as a follower of Jesus in God, you're not only accepted, but you are made complete. He designed you with everything that you need. You don't need to become someone else. You can rest in that knowledge and truth that Christ, you are accepted and you're complete. Listen to this verse from Psalm 139. I just love this. It says, "For you created my innermost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be." But just imagine God just knitting you together, or crocheting you together. Your personality is just how he wants it to be. You're as tall as he has imagined. Your fingers are just the way it is. And even the way how fast you metabolize food was all designed ahead of time. Everything that we are, God's design. He knit us together before we were even created in our mother's womb. Every minute or every minute detail of how he formed you is exactly the way he wanted. Why would you want to be anything other than that? I mean, it's crazy. Why would we, or just imagine if that truth became part of your internal messaging, part of your thought life, when you start to move down those paths of thinking that maybe I need to pretend or put a mask on. But just remind yourself that God designed me just to be me. So if you're feeling rejected, if you're not feeling accepted, know God accepts you just the way that you are. There's no need to hide behind a mask. And again, if you're a Christ follower, he has made you complete. You don't need anything. You don't have to pretend to be someone you're not. Another strategy for me that helped to help me fulfill this need of being accepted was to surround myself with other safe men I could be vulnerable and authentic with. You know, we all experience shame for the things that we've done, which causes us to hide, causes us to disconnect from other people. The main reason we hide is because we don't feel loved. We don't feel accepted. But we need a safe place to come clean, to take down the defenses and take off those masks of competency. Which brings us to the next need that has to get met, and that's the need to be connected. So we all have a desire, just this deep need to know and be known and love and be loved. Hebrews 10:25 says, "Let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another." In fact, there are over 25 one another's in the New Testament. Instruct one another, accept one another, love one another, be kind to one another, and so on. God designed us to one another. He designed us to be connected, to be in community. Connection is supposed to be a two-way street, right? A giving and a receiving. To know and be known and love and be loved. God designed us to get to know someone or some people at a deep emotional level. We need to be interactive and we need to be engaged with other people. As we begin to know them deeper and deeper, we have the opportunity to love them deeply, accepting what we know of them without being judged, without judging them. we also have a need to know and be loved. We must be willing to let safe people into our lives to share what it's like to be us. Again, we need to be authentic and we need to be vulnerable. Important to remember these words from John, 1 John 4:19. We love because he first loved us. It's that simple. How are we able to love someone who is sinful, someone who's made mistakes, someone maybe who's done things that we can't even imagine? It's because Christ first loved us. When I internalize that truth, that I can love because he first loved me, I'm free to show love and acceptance to other sinners like me. There are a couple phrases that seem to help me through the years, just to kind of keep me focused on that. The first one is that my life may be the only Bible somebody reads. Say that again. My life may be the only Bible somebody reads. And the other one is the real test of love isn't loving Jesus, it's loving Judas. Those two phrases just seem to really cement me towards making sure that I am out there and I'm loving people. So the only exposure to God's love for someone else may be how I react when they start sharing what it's like to be them. And if I respond in love, well, maybe they'll see Christ in me. But that's how God designed relationships to be, this good give and take, this two-way street. But what happens when we're not deeply connected? What happens when we only have these surface connections? What happens even when we are disconnected? And I'll tell you what I do. It's not too dissimilar to what I do when I don't feel accepted. I start to become someone I'm not, so I can connect with somebody. The gap for me, of who we are on the inside and who we present on the outside, we either try to close that gap or we try to manage and control that gap. A good example of this was when I first got married. Probably not too uncommon once I got married. The other connections I had in my life, college, work, they started to just fade away. They became less important to me as I focused on my marriage. I think that was good intentions, but my wife and I, we would disagree. We'd miscommunicate or we'd misunderstand each other. And that resulted in a disconnection at that time. And I just feel that disconnection, and I gotta tell you, I can't stand to be disconnected. So I would do whatever it took to regain that connection. So I started to become the person that not who God designed me to be, but who she wanted me to be. And over time, I just lost that. Another example for me was my second wife. Wise counselors will tell us after a divorce that you should wait a year, maybe even 2 years before you start dating, because we just need time to heal. Well, I can be prideful at times. I thought I was better than that. And the main reason, as I look back, I didn't like not being connected to a woman. You probably have heard the term rebounding, right? We rebound, we make unhealthy connections before we're ready to have relationships, because at least for me, I was in this state of disconnection. Now, I will tell you, my third wife, Linda, got that one right. But so what's the solution when we feel disconnected? Simply put, we need to connect somewhere else. I can almost guarantee that if you live in a state of connection, you'll end up making unhealthy, possibly dysfunctional, even destructive choices. It's analogous to taking your hands off the steering wheel of a car, right? You're not going to crash immediately, but you're going to crash eventually. And that's the same way. If you're feeling disconnected and you don't connect somewhere else, you're going to make bad choices eventually. So for me, I found if I'm disconnected, there's 4 ways for me to connect. Number 1, I can connect with myself. For me, that generally titles journaling, just writing what it's like to be me, what I'm feeling that day or what I've gone through. We can connect with God, the person of God, through prayer. We can connect with God's truth, His Bible. And then finally, we can connect with safe others. So important to have a community of guys that you can be open and vulnerable with. Finally, before we move on to the last need, just let me give you one more piece of encouragement. When we aren't fulfilling the need of being accepted or connected, like I said before, we generally have two choices when it comes to that gap between where we are internally and the external image that we portray. And that's to close the gap, right, to wear that mask less and less. The other one is to try to control and manage that gap. But, if we aren't involved in closing the gap and trying to manage it, we have to remember, at least for me, the masks we wear, the way that we pretend. I just don't wear one mask, right? I have multiple ways that I pretend. So for me, I just have to try to control what that image looks like. For you, I might be this way. For you, I might be that way. And trying to manage and control that, that's terrible for me. So what I have found is that if I'm not willing to close the gap, if I'm trying to manage the gap, there's three reasons for me of why I don't try to close the gap, that I just try to stay in managing the gap. The first is fear, right? I'm afraid that if I tell you who I am, you're not gonna like me. So I'm afraid of that. I have fear around that. The second is pride, right? Pride tells me that, hey, I don't need to feel loved and accepted. I can make it on my own. And the last one is shame. Shame makes you want to hide. And I can't seem to find the energy or the resources to come out of hiding. And it's really hard to connect with somebody when you're hiding. But once I move to a healthy place of being accepted and connected, the last deep need that we need met is to feel valued. We need to have meaning or purpose in our lives. And then we also need to live our lives bigger than us. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. But God designed us on purpose for a purpose. And then what I also learned was He doesn't begin at the beginning. He starts with the end in mind, and then your journey along the way. And then he forms and knits you together, equipping you for all of life's journeys, all of the purpose that he has for you. Imagine Jesus' life. He was born into this world, but God didn't decide when he was like 30 years old, hey, I think I'll have him die for the sins of the world. No, God knew before Christ was born the end game, and that was to die for us. It wasn't like he created him, was born, and then along the way he decided what his end game were, what his purpose was going to be. He did that ahead of time. So he does the same thing with us. He knows what his end game is for us, and he knows what that journey is going to look like, and he equips us to do that. Jeremiah 21:11 says that I know the plans I have for you, right? God's got a purpose for you. There is no one else like you at this time in history to accomplish what his plans are for you and the impact that you have on the world. If you didn't exist, there'd be a void in God's story, a missing part in the history of the world. That's how important you are. I want you to hear this message like it was for the first time you heard it. God's got a plan for you. You are God's masterpiece. That's what he says in Ephesians. You're created on purpose, for a purpose, at this time in history. No one else has the same plan that God has for you. So now the big question, how do I find my purpose? Right? I mean, a lot of us were asking these questions since we were teenagers. Who am I and what am I here for? The answer to this can really be life-changing. If we don't know why we're here, and we just can't find the meaning of our lives. So we wander. We feel like there's something missing. And as a side note, it's because there is something missing. If you aren't living your purpose, you're not fully alive. But we all need to have meaning in our lives. That's that deep need that has to get met. We all need to believe we're here for a purpose. And if we're not listening to God, we're going to listen to the world. And then what I found is that I developed this thing called uritis. And that is, I want something bigger. I want a bigger house. I want a bigger salary. I want a bigger TV. Or maybe it's better, right? A better car, a better job, maybe a better spouse. But we all have these things that we need to do to try to find meaning in our lives. And we do crazy stuff, but it's never enough. That stuff never satisfies. The world can't satisfy. And the reason it can't satisfy is because we weren't designed to have meaning and purpose from those things. Imagine, if you will, that you went and you bought a speedboat, right? And you bought it and it's sitting in a trailer in your driveway. And you go out there and you kind of sit in it and relax in it and you drive the steering wheel, maybe play with the steering wheel a little bit, but you do that every day. And then you can't help but think that, boy, this just wasn't all it was cracked up to be. I mean, yeah, it may be different, it may be new, but if I were to be honest, I'm kind of disappointed. So here you and I are, and we're thinking, dude, duh, wasn't meant to be sitting in the driveway. So now a neighbor comes and grabs you and takes the boat out on the ocean or on a lake. And you start to experience a speedboat as it was designed to be. If you're missing out on your purpose, you're not going to be finding meaning and fulfillment in it. So do you think he's ever going to go out and sit on that speedboat in his trailer in the driveway anymore? No way. Man, this guy was able to experience it for what it was designed to be. And in the same way, if we really want to live, we need to find meaning in what God has designed for us to do for His purpose. But there are times when I forget that. Sometimes there are times when I consciously just choose not to live in God's purpose. I can just imagine God up there saying, Kevin, duh, what are you doing? So moving forward, let me share some of the lessons I learned in finding meaning and purpose in my life. We need to begin again with the end in mind. And I refer that to kind of as an umbrella purpose, right? It's our primary reason for living, our reason for being. But then underneath that umbrella, there's smaller purposes, and I found that those change based on the season of life that I'm in. Using Jesus as an example. Remember, he started with the end game. His end game, his primary purpose was to die for the sacrifice of our sins. But then there were seasons in his life where he learned a craft. There was a season in his life where he used his craft. And there was a season in his life for 3 years when he had his ministry. So each of those different seasons had different purposes. And the same is true for us. There's our times when we need to understand that umbrella, that primary purpose that we have, it's to honor and glorify God. That is the primary reason that we're here. And if you want to try to find fulfillment and meaning, know that that's how you got to start doing it. But then, again, we're going to try to, for me, at different seasons in my life. When I was single in my 20s, when I was married, when I was raising kids, when I was developing a marketplace career, now when I'm influencing my grandkids or trying to get to retirement, all those different seasons, there were different purposes along the way for each one of those. For me, when I looked at trying to figure out what those season purposes might be, I looked at three things. I looked at what am I passionate about, right? There's a fire in the belly. And in my 20s, it was different than it was in my 40s, right? I mean, in my 20s, man, I just wanted to serve the Lord full time. In my 40s, I'm raising kids and trying to establish myself in the marketplace. So there's passion. What is it that you have that fire for? And then there's our experiences, right? I mean, as you grow and develop and mature, your experiences are you're gonna have more and more of them. So my life experience in my 20s, again, different than when I'm in my 40s, because I've just learned stuff along the way. So there's going to be a different purpose, because God wants to use those experiences. And then finally, what's your personality, what's your gifting. For me, I don't think personality really changes. I think it gets emphasized in different seasons in our lives, but then we also have to look at how you're gifted naturally, or if you're a Christian, you've been given at least one spiritual gift by the Holy Spirit. So when you're trying to figure out that purpose in that season of your life, look for where you're passionate, look for where your experiences have been, and look for where your personality and gifting is. And I can guarantee that as you do that, God's going to start to move in your heart of what it is that He wants you to do for that purpose in your life. And then finally, God's designed me to live bigger than just me. It took me a while, but I learned God doesn't exist for Kevin. He doesn't exist for Kevin's convenience. He doesn't exist for Kevin's happiness. He's designed me to be bigger than just me. He wants me to live impacting the lives of other people. He wants me to love others as He has loved me. John 15:11-12 says, I've told you this. He's talking to His disciples. I've told you this so that in my joy, I've told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be made complete. My command is this, love each other as I have loved you. And he just emphasizes this as his ministry is starting to come to an end. Just this one command. Not 10 commandments, not 3, certainly not 300. 1, go love people as I have loved you. So if you want your life to have an impact greater than yourself, if you want to live bigger than just you, if you want to leave a legacy and not just live a life, you have to love others. I think we all love the stories of those 1 or 2 people doing amazing things. Steve Jobs and Dave Wozniak started Apple in their garage, Fleming creating penicillin. We love those stories. And I think part of the reason that we do is that it demonstrates great things can come through just one person. Or maybe, I too can do something big with my life. But we argue, don't we? I'm no Steve Jobs. But we forget what God takes what we have and He just magnifies it. Have you ever looked at the wrong end of a binoculars? Right? Things look really small, really limited. But then when you turn them around, the world gets big. Really big. So when I'm focusing on me and I'm looking through the wrong side of the binoculars, I'm limited in how I think. But if I'm willing to turn them around, I can start to see how God sees things. And He just uses us, whatever we have, surrender to Him. And He can use that for big things, for great things. The Bible's full of stories like this, right? One person fully surrendered to Him can do magnificent things. Really big things. Moses, right? God told him to go free 2 million slaves from Egypt. Can't you just hear Moses? Come on, who am I? Oh, God says, okay, well, here, I'll give you a stick. And with that staff, God used Moses, right, to free the people from the greatest superpower on earth. And then on the journey, right, he bumps up against the Red Sea, and God uses the staff to part the Red Sea. Come on, God used a stick. And with David, right, he used a rock and a slingshot to kill a gigantic Philistine. You can bet that those guys were looking through the binoculars the right way. So God wants you to live bigger than just you. He doesn't want you to just live for yourself. He wants to begin to create a legacy. Living for success, it's all about you. Living for significance, that's about living for other people. But none of this works unless you're fully surrendered to Him. But man, if you surrender everything that you have to Him, and if your focus is off of you and onto other people, wow, I mean, that's how the first church in Acts turned the world upside down. Think of the impact you could have on your family, your workplace, even your community, if you'd only look through life's binoculars the right way. All right, just a couple last thoughts. Process through what it means to live a life of being accepted. Just know that the creator of all the universe is madly in love with you. Develop some connections in your life, and remember that if you're feeling disconnected, you can connect with yourself, you can connect with God, you can connect with the Bible, and you can connect with safe other men. And then as you do that, as you spend less energy trying to work on wearing those masks and trying to control that gap, he's going to free you up to have that energy to start living out the purpose that God has for you. All right, well, that wraps up my talk. I want to give everybody a chance. If you want to break out into groups of 2, 3, 4 people, there's some discussion questions on here. It's 10 o'clock. The next session starts at 10:15. So if you want to spend a few minutes, you can do that. Make sure you leave enough time to use the bathroom and get some more coffee and donuts and go to the next session. So, thanks again, you guys.
Thank you, Kevin.